Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Gene, software engineer, technical lead, cloud architect, founder, and AI builder. I've worked on enterprise systems, cloud infrastructure, automation, blockchain, AI, mobile applications. And one thing I've learned from watching this industry closely is this: it's that technology doesn't usually change all at once. The walls start cracking first. And I think that we're watching several of those walls crack simultaneously right now. Now, the wall between Silicon Valley and the rest of the world, the wall between a startup and the massive platforms it depends on, the wall Apple built around app distribution and payments, the wall between automated testing and how an actual human sees an application, and even the wall between HTML and things we assumed required JavaScript. So those sound like completely unrelated stories. Now they're not. They're all telling us the same thing. Software is becoming more accessible, more global, and more intelligent, and also more composable. And that creates opportunity for people who understand what's happening early. So today we're breaking down 5 stories, not just what happened, but what developers and founders should actually do with the information. Let's get into it. So first on the chopping block, we have, well, this is not the first story. Let me rearrange these. Meta is building a startup school. So Meta just launched something called Meta Startup School. And this is interesting because, well, it's quite a generic name, but this is interesting because Meta isn't simply saying, here's Facebook, here's Instagram, here's an advertising dashboard. They're moving further upstream, right? They're saying, let us help teach you how to build the growth engine itself. The initial startup school program is launching in India. It's a 3-month program. The first cohort is going to start in September 1st of 2026. So just, not too long from now. And is targeting nearly 200 early stage consumer brands across different funding stages. Now, these companies receive structured learning, guidance around Meta's platforms and advertising tools, access to AI powered tools, agency consultations, and exposure to VCs and other ecosystem participants. Now, that is very significant. So here's what I think Meta actually wants. Now, Meta doesn't want to meet the next billion-dollar consumer brand after they've already figured everything out. They want to meet the company, when they're still figuring out who is our customer, what creative converts, what audiences respond, right? How much can we spend to acquire somebody? How do Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, and potentially Threads fit into our funnel? Meta wants into the architecture early. And that's very smart because if your company learns how to acquire customers on Meta from the beginning, what happens when you start doing $10 million, right? $50 million, $100 million. You're probably still spending that money or using that money on Meta. So we, RSM, made essentially this point. Meta is positioning itself less like a media pipe waiting for startups to buy ads and more like a growth partner participating while those companies are still learning how acquisition works. So the founder takeaway from all of this is stop viewing giant technology companies only as vendors. Start asking, what programs do they operate? What startup credits do they offer? What accelerator programs do they run? What education do they provide? And what APIs can I build on? What investor network can I potentially access, right? So Google, Microsoft, AWS, NVIDIA, Meta, and others aren't simply selling technology anymore. They're constructing entire ecosystems. And sometimes just being inside the ecosystem gives you leverage you would have otherwise paid thousands or even millions to build yourself. Now, here's a question for you guys to think about. If you were building a consumer startup today, would you rather get $20,000 in funding or 3 months of high-level assistance learning how to reliably acquire customers? Now, think about that, because capital without distribution disappears very quickly. And I actually had a very realistic example of this working with a client of mine's that I actually, I took equity in the project that we were building out together, right? And that was one of the issues that we actually ran into was capital was there, but distribution wasn't, right? Now let's move on to our next story here. Now we have this story might be my favorite. It might be my favorite. Now it's called The Rise of the Borderless Founder. And this was an article published by a very a well-known author. All right. Now the subtitle is even, you can see the name there. The subtitle is even better, right? Let me see. Let's see. It's called Your Background is Your Moat. So the old startup playbook basically said go to Silicon Valley, build your network there, raise money there, hire there, sell there, maybe expand internationally later. The new model is getting much stranger. So you can have engineers in Brazil, operations in America, customers in Europe, manufacturing in Asia, and investors in California. So a complete, mix. And the founder who's on the plane between all four. So that's the Borderless founder. So A16Z's argument is that the international founders can actually have an underappreciated advantage because they potentially maintain strong networks in multiple ecosystems simultaneously. You may know engineers in another market before American recruiters ever discover them. You might have access to companies in your original market that can become early customers. Your diaspora network can produce hires, introductions, advisors, and design partners. And then you combine that with Silicon Valley's capital and startup network. That's very powerful. The internet essentially changed location, but AI is accelerating that even further. And A16Z makes a line in this article that I think encapsulates the era we're entering, right? Silicon Valley is increasingly becoming more of a state of mind than simply a geographic location. Their own apps investing activity reflects this globalization, right? A16Z says 44% of its apps investments over the previous 2 years involved international founders, divided roughly evenly between companies headquartered inside and outside the United States. Now, think about what that really means. You don't necessarily have to choose America or your home market, Asia or America, Europe or America. You can potentially operate across all of them. Now, this is something that I found rather early with Infinity MVP, which is why we have offices in pretty much 3 geographic locations spanning Asia, the US, and also Europe or the EU, right? So this is more than a remote network. Remote work, was I can work from another country. Borderless company building is different countries becoming strategic assets. Maybe one country gives you engineering talent, another gives you customers, another gives you manufacturing, another gives you capital, another gives you regulatory advantages, and another gives you research partnerships. That's a completely different level of thinking. So AI is going to make this even more powerful. Imagine running a company where AI handles translations, documentation, customer support, code generation, research, market analysis, outreach and assistance, meeting summaries, international communications. Suddenly, the coordination penalty of operating globally drops. It doesn't disappear. Different currencies are real. Taxes are real, employment laws are very real, immigration is real, data sovereignty is real, time zones are real. But software keeps lowering the coordination costs, and that is what gets interesting. Now, a question I have for the founders out there is, would you rather build a company optimized around one city, or a company where you deliberately choose the best geography for each part of the business? I think we're going to see way more founders choose option 2. Let's move on. Now, story number 3. You need to pay attention, developers. This one directly affects the money. Apple announced major new business terms for apps distributed in the European Union. These changes go into effect October 1st, 2026. Developers can already sign the new terms, but there's a lot here. So let me translate it into normal developer English. So option 1, you have App Store plus Apple payments. If your EU App Store application uses Apple's in-app purchase system, the standard commission is 26%. Qualifying developers, including many developers in Apple's small business program, and the qualifying subscriptions can pay 15%. Option 2, App Store plus your own payment processing. If the app remains inside the App Store but uses alternative payment processing, standard commission is 20%. Certain qualifying developers is 10%. Option 3 is to link out for payment. So apps that send users outside the app to complete a purchase, the standard is 15%. Qualifying programs is going to be 10%. For option 4, if you distribute outside the App Store, here's where it kind of really gets interesting. So apps distributed through alternative marketplaces or directly through the web will pay what Apple calls the core technology commission. That's 5% on digital transactions. The previous per install core technology fee is being replaced under these new terms. And there's another big change. For the first time under these updated EU terms, developers can offer Apple in-app purchase and alternative payment options within the same application. That's huge. But once developers select their payment configuration, Apple says it must generally remain in place for 12 months. So this isn't, oh, I'll test Stripe this weekend. You're making an actual business model decision. So choose wisely and be careful. So app distribution itself is also opening. So Apple is also broadening eligibility for companies that want to distribute applications directly from the web or operate alternative marketplaces. So beginning October 1st, Apple lists several potential eligibility paths, including financial stability, venture backing, a completed financial audit, certain institutional status, a $1 million standby letter of credit, or reaching 1 million first annual installs worldwide. Okay, so that is how you become eligible. So apps distributed outside Apple's store still have to go through Apple's notarization process. So Apple isn't disappearing from the equation, but the architecture is changing. So here's why founders should care about this. Imagine you're building an iPhone SaaS product. Before you write your payment architecture now, you should potentially ask, where are my customers? What percentage are in Europe? Am I eligible for Apple's reduced commission? Should I use IAP, alternative processing, link out, alternative distribution? What does conversion look like under each method? What compliance burden comes with each? Suddenly, payments aren't merely an engineering question. They're a unit economics question, right? If your business processes $10 million of digital revenue, a few percentage points becomes a lot of money. And the lesson here is, this is why developers who understand business can become dangerous. A junior developer asks, which payment SDK should I install? A senior product engineer asks, what payment architecture maximizes conversion while minimizing platform costs and operational risk? All right. So kind of the same question, but one gives you a more complete answer and solution, while the other just simply, gives you a simple answer to a simple question. So you want to think about these things and go a little bit more in depth on these initial questions, because there's a lot to unpack rather than just which payment SDK should I install, right? It's a lot more deeper than that, because you have to always be thinking about the architecture underneath when you're just starting out, because you don't want to have to go back and do something like a what we would call a rewrite of your code base. Okay, so two completely different conversations there. Now, moving on. It's going to get a little bit technical here. So Shopify had a problem that almost every mature engineering organization eventually experiences. Their end-to-end tests became unreliable, and the flaky tests are worse than people realize. So because eventually developers stop believing them. Now, the test fails. Hey, it's probably flaky. You retry, it fails again, you retry, and eventually your supposedly automated quality system becomes something everybody mentally ignores. According to Shopify's write-up, summarized in the material we're discussing, their old mobile system used Appium and WebDriver IO. Tests could also do dangerous things like arbitrary pauses, interact with underlying view hierarchy nodes, and perform actions in ways that didn't necessarily reflect what an actual merchant could see and interact with. Eventually, the suite became unreliable enough that it had to be removed from the pull request checks. Now, think about that. You built automated testing to protect production, and the testing became so unreliable that developers couldn't use it as a gate anymore. That's technical debt at the infrastructure level. Now, they simply didn't tell engineers, write better test. They redesigned the testing interface itself. They created a more opinionated wrapper, a constrained builder-style API, so every interaction was forced to have an assertion. And dangerous escape hatches were intentionally labeled unsafe. Now, I love that, because there's a bigger engineering principle hiding here. Now, good internal tools make the wrong thing hard. If everybody keeps misusing your API, at some point, stop blaming everybody. Maybe the API allows too many bad decisions. Design the developer experience so that the safe path is easy, the observable path is normal, and the reckless path feels reckless. That's platform engineering. And this is what makes the story feel especially interesting in 2026. Instead of relying entirely on the internal application hierarchy to identify elements, computer vision can reason about the screen more like the merchant using the application. That's a major conceptual shift. Traditional automated testing says find this programmatic node. Vision based testing moves towards find what the human actually sees. That's incredibly interesting because AI could gradually make automated testing less dependent on brittle implementation details. Now imagine an AI QA agent where you simply provide add product to store, update inventory, create discount, complete checkout, and the agent visually navigates the software like an actual user. Now change the underlying UI framework. If the visible workflow still works, maybe the test still works. So that is very powerful. The bigger lesson here is that we're moving from automation that operates primarily on software representations toward automation that increasingly operates on human representations. Vision, language, intent, goals. This is one of the biggest reasons AI will change software engineering. Not because developers disappear tomorrow, because we're changing the abstraction layer at which machines understand software. Now, our next story, and finally, we need to talk about HTML because developers have spent years installing entire libraries to accomplish things browsers increasingly can do natively. Now, this article titled HTML Can Do That highlights modern HTML capabilities, including dialog, popovers, group details, command and command for, native input pickers, data list, native lazy loading, and hidden until found elements. These features can replace JavaScript for a surprising number of common interface behaviors. Now, think about dialogues, for example, right? Historically, you want to modal. Install component library, create state, create click handler, manage escape key, handle focus, handle backdrop, potentially fight accessibility. This is your typical workflow. Now, modern HTML is going to give us increasingly capable dialog behavior. Popovers, native capabilities. Accordions, multiple details, elements sharing a name can behave like an exclusive accordion. Autocomplete, data list. Lazy to load an image. The platform grew up while some of us weren't even looking. Now, this matters even more in the AI era because AI makes it extremely easy to add code like build me a dropdown, boom, 150 lines. Install this library, boom, another dependency. Create this modal, boom. But elite engineers are increasingly going to need to ask, do we actually need any of this? So AI lowers the cost of generating complexity. That means humans need to become better at removing unnecessary complexity. So that's going to be a major engineering skill. Anyone can tell Claude add another dependency, but the experienced engineer says, why are we shipping 40 kilobytes of JavaScript for something the browser already does? So that mentality matters, and it's going to increasingly matter. So now watch how all these stories suddenly line up. So you have Meta Startup School. So platforms are moving closer to founders. You have the Borderless founder. Geography is becoming less restrictive. You have the Apple EU changes. Distribution is becoming more open. You have Shopify testing. Machines are beginning to understand software more like humans do. You have modern HTML. The underlying platform itself is becoming more capable. That's why I keep telling developers, do not define your career by a framework. Don't be the React guy, the Angular guy, the AWS guy. Those are just the tools. Your real job is understanding systems, distribution, architecture, economics, users, infrastructure, reliability, AI, and increasingly how all of these layers interact. Here's my prediction. Over the next several years, I think we're going to see an explosion of extremely small teams running surprisingly global businesses. 3 engineers, maybe 5 people, AI agents everywhere, customers in 6 countries, infrastructure from AWS, AI from multiple model providers, marketing through Meta, payments through Stripe, mobile distribution through Apple, open source infrastructure, automated QA agents, and founders operating from wherever gives the company the most leverage. That's not science fiction. Every piece of that exists already. The pieces just haven't fully snapped together yet. And whenever that happens in technology, the builders who see the pieces first usually have an advantage. So here are some takeaways. If you're a founder, look beyond funding. Chase platform programs, ecosystems, partnerships, and distribution advantages. If you're an international founder, stop assuming geography is automatically a disadvantage. Your second network may be an asset to your domestic competitors, or maybe an asset your domestic competitors don't have. If you're an iOS developer, study the new EU economics before blindly implementing your old payment architecture. If you're an engineering leader, when developers repeatedly misuse an internal tool, redesign the tool instead of writing another Confluence page nobody reads. If you're an AI developer, computer vision plus testing is a massive area to watch. If you're a front-end developer, learn modern HTML again. Seriously, the browser of 2026 is not the browser you learned on 10 years ago. Now, let me leave you guys with 5 questions. So question number 1, would you join a meta-style startup program if it meant building part of your growth strategy around their ecosystem? Number 2, are borderless companies going to become normal, or will regulation keep companies primarily tied to one country? Number 3, if you were launching an EU iPhone app today, would you still default to Apple's payment system? Number 4, would you trust computer vision-based AI to determine whether your application passed an end-to-end test? And finally, what's one thing you're currently using JavaScript for that the browser can probably already do? Drop your answers below. In closing, I want to say technology doesn't wait for us to become comfortable. The rules change, the platforms change, regulations change, browsers change. AI changes what can be automated, and people who win aren't necessarily the people who memorize the most APIs. They're the people who keep updating their mental model. I'm Gene. This is Algorithmic Innovations, and around here, we don't just talk about the future of technology, we build with it. I'll catch you on the next one.